Hi guys, so this is the lecture for gamelan music, and this is the music of Indonesia. Uh, I've been exposed to this music before. In fact, I've been to Jakarta for performances, and I got to actually witness the culture of the country, and also to hear the music they have to play. And of course, I was amazed by how different this is from how our ears are trained. So there are a few things that I would like to touch base with regarding gamelan music. So when it comes to the location or where it is, it's the music of Indonesia. So you have different regions in Indonesia where they have this type of music, and of course it differs from one place to another, from one part of that country to another. Music of the gamelan is music that is connected to the tradition and the culture, and of course it spans for hundreds of years. And of course we have a lot of differences between it and Western classical music or Arabic music. We see Western classical music as music of Europe that got exposed to other cultures and actually took from it or borrowed from it, or that sparked new uh, branches in classical music, within classical music, in the Romantic era and the 20th century as well, or the end of the Romantic to the 20th century. And it's different than Arabic music in the fact that also Arabic music has affected the West, and of course was affected by other cultures. So we're for example, in the Arabic world, we've been exposed to the music of Africa, Asia, Europe, and of course we were affected by it, or it has, of course, an influence on our music as well. Where on the other hand, you have the gamelan music being music that's very isolated in islands, and it's not really exposed to the public, and it was not really popular up until the group went to Paris and had a performance of the gamelan music, and that affected a lot with especially composers like Debussy, like Eric Satie. Those are composers that heard the music and were influenced by it. In fact, Debussy is the father or the founder of Impressionism in music. Impressionism in music is different than having classical music in the Romantic era. I mean, you're still using notes, you're still using rhythm and everything like classical music, but you're thinking outside the box, thinking outside of the major or minor tonalities. And of course, with that, you have two modes that are used in gamelan music. One that has 7 notes, and those are the whole tone scales, and the other is a pentatonic scale. Pentatonic scale is it's kind of like the Nubian scale, but of course it's different in the sequence, but it actually has only 5 notes. So you have ba da ba da ba da ba da da, and those are the 5 notes. And then of course you have those two to tune to, and with that you have a lot of varieties um, in the way you look at the music even. With classical music you have forms and you have major and minor tonalities. With Arabic music you still have forms and you had maqamat. In gamelan music you have a lot more that has to do with the concept of playing that is tuned to a certain maqam, but it's not treated as such. Meaning you don't have the tonic and the dominant and subdominant and the important notes in a major scale or in a minor scale or even in a mode. You could actually vary, have varieties of that as long as you're staying within those notes. When it comes to the instruments, they're mainly percussive instruments, and of course you have so many of them. The one that's apparent to everyone is the gong, and of course they're the family of gong. So they have the different sizes and the way they play. But they're other than that. They have also metallophone instruments, or instruments that use mallets, kind of like the xylophone. And you have a lot of those families of instruments. When it comes to the tuning, in Western classical music, we actually tune to a 440 gigahertz, and it could be 141, 42, 43, but we are actually in agreement. And of course, it varies by where you're at. So if you're in Europe, it's going to be different than in the US, and then different from other parts of the world. But then we have to agree as an orchestra to tune on the same frequencies before the concert, and hence the oboe with the tuning and given the A. That's what we're talking about here. You have one tonality and it's tuned, and it's 440 or 41, 42, and you tune to that. In Arabic music, you have the same thing today, even though Arabic music was not really well tempered or well tuned like it is. And of course, in some cases, in some maqamat, it is not well tuned because we also use quarter tones instead of only whole tones and half tones in classical music. In the gamelan culture, it is different because you have instruments that tune together, but then they tune with only a few cents with each other. So they're not supposed to tune exactly like one, but they're actually supposed to play. And the clash between the notes or the frequencies together creates something else. And that's what you actually get to hear as a result to hearing this whole thing. Again, another thing for the function of gamelan music versus classical music. Classical music, each person has their own part, and it is somewhat a fragment, yes, but it's still a line of music that one person is responsible for, or one section is responsible for playing the same exact thing. And of course, you gather them with the different sections or different groups, and then you have the classical music. In Arabic music, you have maqam, and you also have the difference here with classical music is kind of, you have a different way or different mindset to look at things. So for Arabic music, you have each person playing the same line of music. Like, I mean, they're all playing the same line of music, but they have individual input into the music. And that's another thing. For gamelan music, it is fragments, so each person has got to play something different, or there are two that double together, but then in the end, if you hear one line by itself, it will not make any sense because the role here is divided between so many players in the group, and what you're supposed to listen to, is not one person responsible for melody and another responsible for supporting the melody and so on, but you actually have all of them, and all of them in the end make up the musical work that you get to hear. So another thing, classical music, we document everything, and that's why you could trace it back all the way. In Arabic music, we don't really use that much of documentation, or we didn't really have that much of documentation or documented Arabic music up until the 20th century, I would say. Or end of the 19th century. But then with gamelan music, the tuning, it's oral transmission, so it is not really written, but at some point in their history they had a way of tuning, of writing things down, but it was not according to a musical system. It was actually according to numbers, so it's very mathematical. The effect of gamelan music on Western classical music is very apparent in the Impressionism movement, which pretty much took Europe by storm. So you have a lot of composers that followed that, and it uses a lot of those whole scales and pentatonic scales to give that feel of exoticism, or to give that feel. So they used gamelan instruments, and they also used gamelan way of thinking, or tried to adapt it to classical music. With that, you have composers like Debussy and others that actually wrote music using that. You get to the 20th century, and you have a composer like, there are so many of them, I'm just calling a couple or three of them just to give you an example. You have John Cage, and that's an American composer from the 20th century, who is known to write not according to major or minor scales at all, but actually according to bringing in new sounds even. So you have a composition called, or compositions written for what we call the prepared piano. You know how the piano is and how you have a set of strings and you have the keys and you press the key, it hits the string. He actually added metal pieces to the piano, tried to break it from the Western well-tempered and concept, because on the piano the note is tuned. So of course you play it and it's well-tempered and your ear is accustomed to that. You get used to that, but you don't really get used to something that's not well tuned. It will sound more of a nachez. But he actually did that, and he added metal pieces to the strings. So when you get to play on the piano, or to hear, or when you get to hear that piece, which you guys already have, you don't hear the piano more than you actually hear instruments that are playing different types of sounds, but not with an exact tonality that you'd expect it to be. So that's another composer. Eric Satie is someone that I really like, a person I like to listen to, and he's got really nice pieces written, also influenced by the gamelan music. Um, there are so many things to discuss with gamelan music, but I would like for you to make sure to understand the concept, know a little bit about the instruments and their families, or how they are put together, and also to know a little bit about the history and the traditions of that type of music. Of course, we have a lot of compositions written by Western composers following the gamelan methods, and you could clearly hear that, or when you listen to it, you get to hear that, you hear the difference between it and actually classical music or Western traditions in music. And of course that goes with Impressionism, and from then on out you have a lot of composers that followed that. But you don't see the other way around. You don't see that. We see that in Arabic music. We see composers that wrote Arabic pieces or music, for the Arab world, and it was very well influenced by the West, or the new, directions with music. You have music from the 30s, 40s, 50s until today, and we have a lot of. You even have a whole genre of Franco-Arab music. So that's another thing. It's really important or really interesting to also understand gamelan music as music that was closed in versus another culture that is open to new ideas. By that I mean Arabic music or even Western classical music. Western classical music takes it and puts it in a different direction, or takes it and actually try to adapt to it or modify it to the liking of that culture. With Arabic music, I think it was different, but we got that to discuss tomorrow when I get to see you guys in the Zoom. Thank you very much, and please try to let me know if you have any questions regarding the assignments, and I'll get back with you. I'll see you again tomorrow. Thank you. Bye.